I am Dominique Lazarski, and I chair Uecna, the European Union Against Aircraft Nuisance. It's a network of communities fighting aircraft pollution. Many years ago, one of our members, EANS, DFLD in Germany, organized the only network of aircraft monitoring system showing the noise levels of aircraft and aircraft trajectory near airports. A residents organization helping others for a small cost is what we all need. And two people will testify of this. The first one will be Mike Gerard, who is not yet there, but hopefully he will join later. He is a resident of the Geneva airport. He lives in Versoix. He's a former CERN engineer, and he's been very, very active in respect of Geneva airport. And then George Theodosious, who joined Environmental Harmony, our Greek member, some time ago, and he's been a pilot for almost 40 years, maybe still working in this activity, but also for our Greek friends fighting the nuisance or pollution of Athens airport. They will report on their experience and how EANS has helped them in their fight against the airport. But before that, Martin Kessel will present EANS work, and Eleftheria, you have the floor to present Martin.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am presenting Martin Kessel, an activist from Waldorf, Frankfurt, who you know very well, most of you. He is a member of the board at the EANS, the NGO who is making noise visible in Germany and the rest of Europe. Martin is also a member of the advisory board in the Bundesvereinigung gegen Fluglärm, and he's our secretary at the board of directors at Uecna. Martin Kessel runs a successful international business based in Frankfurt. He has lived close to Frankfurt Airport all his life, and he will explain about the EANS net and the noise monitoring. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eleftheria, and good evening or good morning to everybody. I tried to explain in 10 minutes what we are doing, and hopefully you can work with this well. More than 20 years ago, Horst Weise founded this association and had the idea to make a noise measurement station above his house. He wanted to show it's really this noisy where he stays. And he was an engineer, an IT technology man, and that's what came out is a network today. And what you see now in your screen is 24 hours flights in Frankfurt. On the right side, you see east, and the left side, the west area. And the flights are normally coming from the east. And in this picture, they come from the west side, and you see the landings. And in the downside, in the south, you see the starting planes leaving Frankfurt. So this is one of our very typical pictures of one day of flight tracks. The European aircraft noise measurement system started in Frankfurt, Germany, and we are able today to get every day and every minute from more than 790 measurement stations noise values. Those stations are established on buildings, public buildings, but as well on private homes. 1/3 of our members are communities that are towns, regions, some airports as well, and the other members are private people. In total, we are 170 people. We don't get any funding from a third part, so we have our member fees that is not high, and we have income from writing invoices for jobs that we do if we make any analysis. So you see, we are in many countries visible, but not all, and we could install more noise measurement stations, or if you have values, you just send them to us and we could show it in our system. We visualize aircraft noise. That means you can see the noise value 5 minutes after the plane was taking off or landing in your area. We measure the level, the impulsiveness and the frequency. And what you see here now in the screen is the noise values in 1 minute or 1 day or 1 hour. So you can always track this and see 5 minutes later, was this noise really like this, or do I spinning? Because a lot of time the airports told us it's a problem for our people, or the people are spinning, they tell something that is not true. But since we have now 20 years this system, we could always verify the noise itself. We could say it was this noisy, and we could distinguish as well between the noise of a motorcycle that passed and the airplane. So all these little round spots that you see have been airplanes in Frankfurt. If you go down in a second, 6 seconds, you see this 2 hours here. And even if you go down to see 30 minutes time, then you see this value. This is all visible for free. Nobody has to pay for. It's a service to the public. It's a service to the democracy as well, because we see us as democracy supporting people. We help the citizens who are annoyed by noise that they could see the noise values. What you see here is the flight tracks, Frankfurt, that are as well to see on our system, and you can, with a web link that's not now working, follow the flight track and see if where the plane is coming from and where it's going to. You can as well see, if you click on those noise values, the name of the flight, the airline who is going to fly, and you can as well select one single flight and trace him and follow him, like you see here in Frankfurt when they go out, and you can see when they are turning, where they are going out, or where they're coming in. New is for now more than 15 years that we have as well the values of most of the planes in the world and their engine, that we could say or make a note about the impact on emissions. That means if we have a flight like here, this Lufthansa plane, and we could see this is a 340, and we could see what is the impact of this plane to the area in the landing and takeoff period of 25 kilometers coming in and going out. So we have as well the impact on the emissions. This is all visible if you go to one flight down, and a lot of people know our system but never went deeper, for example, to emissions. So we have as well the values of what is the pollution coming to the area. And new as well is that we have the ultra fine particles now starting to collect as well. Here you see now the emissions that we have calculated for this airplane that I have just shown to you. And we know the impact on 25 kilometers coming in, taxi out, and flying out. This is the value that this plane with these engines going to have in our area. You see as well how flights are coming in. You can as well see if a flight was too deep or going the wrong way. I have only some minutes to show you all this. That's why we can't make more adventures now in the internet to show more about, but you can do this after the webinar this evening. So we have a lot of statistics, and the biggest value that we have is our database. Nobody has the database that we have. Not one organization globally has the database we have. We have 20 years of, more than 20 years of plain noise. So if you send us your noise values, the noise will be still visible tomorrow, after tomorrow, next year, after next year. So we have noise values where we could make as well studies with this. That means we could, on your noise values that you send or on the noise values of others, make a calculation if there is a change of a flight track, if it was less loud or more loud in the past, or what will happen if they change anything in flying. So these noise values is the big treasure that we have in our database. And a lot of public interest is in this database because there are people writing their master thesis or other researchers who want as well to know something about noise, about flight tracks and the impact on the population. So this is what we are doing, and now it's up to you to put up your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. That was very interesting. I'm sure there will be lots of questions, but before your questions, I would ask, I can't see Mike Gerard, so maybe if George Theodosious, you could now, oh, Hélène, we'll wait after the two other presentations and for the questions, okay? George, are you ready to speak about your experience of using EANS? Please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself, George. We can't hear you.
Sorry for that. I don't know how it happened, but it muted itself. I didn't do it. Okay. So just because somebody requested through a message to say a few words about myself, I've been an electrical engineer with a PhD focused on, let's say, finite elements in fluid mechanics. And I've been also a pilot all my life with over 25,000 hours in all sorts of airplanes, from light to very heavy transatlantic jets. So coming to what has happened here in Greece and what we have seen, I got involved into this noise control and measurement and assessment a few years ago, back in 2009, when I was still flying for Olympic. Then I had to leave. I resided in the Middle East for about 11 years, and now I am back. And I can see that they have made a huge progress by installing ADS-B receivers, by which they can track certain data from the departing aeroplanes from Athens Airport. My view was that other than the sound level measuring stations that everybody's using to assess the nuisance caused by the aircraft, we should focus, or at least here in Greece, they should focus on the following thing. Today's engines, the last generation of aircraft, are much more quieter than the engines as they were 20 years ago. Now, the noise limits at the airports were set 20 years ago for the more noisy engines, which means that today's engines, they can very easily meet the requirements set 20 or 30 years ago, which means that this leaves to the airline industry the latitude to deviate from the noise abatement procedures without violating the limits. And in Greece, we are making an effort to redesignate the target. The target is not just to meet the noise limits at the measuring stations around the airport, but to compel everybody to do the takeoff in such a way that the noise becomes the minimum possible. Now, Athens Airport itself has established very strict procedures. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the ICAO noise abatement procedures. We had made a presentation here. Let me see if I can share a screen with you. No, I don't think I can do it because I have a computer with multiple screens here. But anyway, there are certain rules on the way an aircraft takes off in order for it to get as far as possible vertically from the inhabited areas. And these rules include the first reduction of power. Normally we take off with what we call takeoff thrust. And then after a certain altitude, we can reduce to what we call climb thrust. Now, when we reduce to climb thrust, that means that our angle of climb becomes less. We don't climb as fast as with takeoff thrust. Then at another certain altitude, we go to the second step where we start accelerating the aeroplane at the cost of gaining altitude, because we need to accelerate, clean up the flaps. I'm sure most of you have flown in aeroplanes and have seen this procedure, which means that practically once you reach the acceleration altitude, the flight becomes level. It doesn't gain any more altitude until the speed is built up to 250 knots. And then it starts climbing again. Now, this is what we call the noise abatement procedure. There are certain rules in Athens Airport on what is the minimum altitude to reduce from takeoff thrust to climb thrust, and then what is the minimum altitude to start your acceleration. And these rules are the strictest available from all the ICAO sets of rules. The problem was, as we realized with the equipment that the club here installed in Greece, we started seeing what are the aeroplanes doing, at what altitude they appear to be reducing the thrust, and at what altitude they appear to be accelerating. And the results were stunning. We found out that roughly 80% of departures from Athens do not conform to the regulations. They just violate them. And this causes a huge amount of nuisance. Okay, so the idea is that all these departures that are violating the rules do not exceed the noise limits, but at the same time, do not restrict the noise as much as they should be restricting it. So we are now undertaking an effort to see who in Greece, what is the authority that is responsible for enforcing those air traffic rules, and what is the authority responsible for getting the data that we are providing to them to certify the violations and start imposing some penalties on the violators so that they stop this bad practice of annoying everybody around the airport just to save 10 or 15 kilograms of fuel. What I did not mention to you is that for the airlines, is that the lowest the thrust reduction altitude and the lower the acceleration altitude is, the more kilograms of fuel they gain. Nothing significant. I mean, on a mid-range jet like an Airbus 320 or a Boeing 737, you gain about 15 to 18 kilograms of fuel. That's all. When you're going to burn about, let's say, anywhere between 5 and 10 tons on your trip. But they are just nickeling and diming the fuel, and as a result, they do not follow the noise abatement procedures. So the effort now is to officialize the data that we are collecting, and they have been officialized. They are now quality certified, okay? And they have ISO certification on the equipment, and we have developed software that detects the violations. And with this, we are going to the authorities to ask them a very simple question. We will ask them, tell us, guys, for the 20 years that this airport has been operating, how many violators did you catch? I know what the answer is. The answer is 0. But they have to say that, which means that we are finding the Greek state and the authorities in huge neglect of protecting the people from the noise pollution. So this is roughly where we are standing at now. We have assessed a lot of departures. We have recorded continuous violations, and we are ready now to take all this data to the authorities, to the Greek state, and ask them to undertake the responsibility of enforcing the rules that they just write on paper, but they never enforce, without taking care of the neighbors of the airport. Another thing that we are getting into now is the fact that Athens Airport, like all the European airports, they advise the pilots to not use maximum reverse thrust on landing, but just use idle reverse thrust. This makes a huge difference in the noise level emitted from the airport when the aeroplane is reversing its engines, while it makes only a very small difference in reverse capability. The difference between idle reverse and full reverse is just a 25% gain, but in terms of noise, it's over 400% gain. So in the directions to the pilots for Athens Airport and most other European airports is do not use maximum reverse unless required for safety reasons. Now, judging from the lengths of the runways, you never have any safety issue. They're very long runways, you do not need to use maximum reverse. Yet, a lot of pilots are using it just to be able to exit from the runway at a closer exit, so they avoid like 2 or 3 minutes of taxi time to the gate. And this makes a whole racket. Sometimes here in the area, we can hear these noises in a distance of many kilometers away from the airport. So we tackled this problem, and we recently had a meeting with the Airport Environment Administration, and we asked them what they have done on those 20 years of operation of the airport to get at least one violator. There are many violators every day, and the result, of course, was nothing. So this is where we are at. We have the equipment to assess the violations, okay, to confirm them and to present them to the authorities and ask the authorities to apply the rules, which I believe will bring a significant improvement in the quality of life of the community surrounding the airport. That's what I had to say for today. I mean, I'm ready for questions myself as well.
George, thank you very much indeed, and to Martin as well. Mike is not here, so we'll go on to questions. Just to introduce myself, I'm John Stewart. I'm the Vice Chair of Uecna, and I'll be facilitating the question session. And as I've said before, I've got the advantage that this is in English and my mother tongue is English. If you're not a native English speaker and you're a little bit hesitant about speaking in English, don't worry, we all understand. We really want to hear what you've got to say, even though your English is not terribly good. Your English will certainly be better than I can speak in any other language. So feel good about yourself. Right. If you put your ideally put your virtual hand up, otherwise just put your hand up. I can't quite see everybody on the screen, but so if I miss you, just start talking. Really, I think Elaine had her hand up, and then Martin, and there are also 1 or 2 points in the chat. So we'll start with Elaine, and then we'll go on to Martin.
Yes. Good evening. Good morning. Good day to everyone. Thank you, Martin and George, for your presentations. Very interesting information. Martin, I think that I asked you this before, but I'm not quite sure. Would this, what you're doing, would that be available to our communities here in the United States?
Yes, we could receive online as well from the United States. We get already information noise data from Montreal Airport. They have 3 or 4 stations, and this is an international system. Our activity is existing online or globally as a global activity. So you can send the data, and we put your area in our map, and then everybody could see how noisy it is around your airport and yourself as well.
Okay, so can perhaps I'll email you separately to get the information so I could send it out to our community's members who are would be very interested in participating in this.
Yes, you have just there are 2 kinds of noise measurement stations levels of quality. You can have a certified station that's about $2,800, or you have a not certified station that's for $400-500 to get. You need just computer access. You need to put the antenna is a small one. You can put it on the balcony. You can put it on the roof. You can put it, if it's on a public building, everybody believes the values are more valuable because it's on a school, not on your private home, but it's the same noise, by the way. But you can install this, but it's sometimes helpful if you ask your community to join you, to support you financially to do this. But if it's then on the building of the kindergarten or somewhere, then they think, oh, this noise is more than if it's on your home. But then you send the data online, and we show 5 minutes later the noise that you have in your area.
Okay. All right. I will be emailing you to get some more information. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Elaine. Martin, welcome. Do you want, not just Martin, but everybody else, if you want to just say both what country you're in and what airport you're concerned about, I think that's helpful for everybody else on the call. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you, John. It's Martin Peachy. Local airport here is Stansted, one of the 3 London airports, although Luton would claim to be a London airport too. I also, as John knows, represent communities on the government's airspace and noise engagement group. That's the group between various stakeholders. So I also apologize for being late. So I missed Martin's presentation. I'm sorry about that. But just picking up on what George said, I absolutely, totally agree about reverse thrust. We have that problem here. They've got fast exit taxiways at Stansted, and they rush off the main runway, maximum reverse thrust, and it is a huge noise, particularly at night. So you can imagine the scene. You're coming back, it's a short haul flight. It's probably done 2 sectors, maybe even 3. Getting in by 11:30, and there's a thunderous noise with reverse thrust as they're using the fast exit taxiway, particularly if they want to be on time. So anything we can dream up to get that sorted so they only use idle thrust would be a huge step forward in my view of noise. I'm not sure what Martin said earlier, but I'm sure I would agree with the need to have the rules enforced. One of the problems I find here in the UK is that there are rules there, but the Department for Transport and the message in its name, Department for Transport, the government department, very, very rarely enforces any rules. And those rules that do exist for noise, the headroom for those rules are so high that very rarely do airlines infringe those rules. So in my view, there's a whole area where we need to try and make sure the rules don't have so much headroom on noise particularly, and then to try and encourage the government to enforce those. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Martin. It's worth just saying that there's a lot of interesting stuff emerging in the chat. We do save the chat, and we can circulate the chat. And just to say that, obviously this has been recorded and it goes up on YouTube on our website within the next few days. There's a few interesting. There's no hands up right now, but Colin, Martin, you come back, and then Colin, do you want to be ready to make some of the questions you were asking in the chat, because I think a lot of people will be interested in the answers. But I'll come to Martin first.
I wanted to answer to the reverse thrust problem. Many airports have this problem like you describe it. at many airports, it's forbidden to use this method at landings to put on this extra energy, make extra noise, and to stop the plane in this way, or to reduce the energy of the plane. We had a long period of control for this, as it's forbidden in Frankfurt as well. The airport himself installed a measurement system for this. Along on the one-way, they had installed different noise measurement points and as well a webcam to see where's the touchdown and when they use it. It's only allowed in emergency, or it's only allowed if it's waning and a dangerous touchdown. And the interesting is that it's some seconds that they use it, and they have the pilots have been confronted with this question. But the Lufthansa, especially in Frankfurt, is the main airport for Lufthansa, and they do not accept this. The pilots, they laugh about the airport. They did not complain of the airport himself. When they complained and said, "Hey guys, you did something that is not allowed in Frankfurt," and it's the complaint was like going away. So everybody knows it's not legal, it's not to do, it's part of the framework not to do this, but everybody does it again and again.
Thanks, Martin. Josh, your hand is up, but I'll come to Colin first, because as I say, Colin, there's a number of interesting points and questions you put in the chat, which I think will resonate with other people.
Thank you. Two main questions. One is, sorry, I should say I'm involved with Farnborough Airport, which is Europe's largest private jet airport. So a lot of the aircraft are not using ADS-B. And so my question was, what technology is being used to track aircraft? Is it only ADS-B, or is other equipment being used to track non-ADS-B aircraft? And then the second question is around what equipment in terms of receivers and sound monitors are you using, and the software to manipulate that data. That question is around how can we set up a number of monitoring stations around Farnborough Airport that is commensurate with other groups and what they're doing.
Thanks, Colin. Martin, do you want, George, yes, you come in and then I'll bring in Martin.
I could answer these questions, or it is true that smaller aircraft don't have ADS-B transponders yet, but those are very few, and they are the smaller aircraft. All the major aircraft, now they have installed the ADS-B, and most of them have installed the ADS-C, which is even more capable than the ADS-B. So this is where we can collect the data from. I mean, the flight data, what the pilots do and what speeds they maintain and when they accelerate and everything else. However, in a recent talk with the Athens Airport Administration, we told them my idea, which is to get the data right off the air traffic radar. The air traffic radar, by using just a simple mode C transponder, can get enough information for us to extract, to extrapolate, and see all the things that we need to see. And when I threw this idea on the table, they told me, oh, you know, well, there's certain secrecy about the air traffic data. And for me, the next step that we are going to undertake here in Greece is go and talk to the Ministry of Transportation and tell them to explain to us why air traffic data is secret, and even not secret, let's say confidential. But even if this is the case, then give us a confidential clearance, because you know what we're using this data for, okay? And we can have a lot more reliable assessments of the violations by using the data directly off the air traffic radar system. For me, using ADS-B is just a remedy. I don't know if I answered your questions on this.
Yes, thank you. Because private jet passengers are very protective, we would never be able to get data for non-commercial flights, but that obviously is unique for Farnborough and the private jets. The other situation is that there are a lot of aircraft which are displaced because of the new airspace from Farnborough, which are general aviation light aircraft. So about 50% of aircraft that are making noise, and they tend to be 50, 60-year-old aircraft that are very noisy, are not using ADS-B. So they're using multilateration and things like that. So we don't have data for those aircraft. I wondered if anyone had a way around that.
Okay, well, pretty soon there will be no aircraft not using ADS-B because it's going to be enforced throughout the airspace now. Okay, it's just a matter of maybe 3 or 4 more years before anybody who doesn't have an ADS-B will not be able to fly. Now, regarding the reverse thrust and the previous gentleman that talked about the reverse thrust, my view as a pilot is the following. We do apply what we call idle reverse upon landing. As I said, the difference in reverse thrust from idle to full is just a 20 to 25% increase, except that the difference in noise level is 400% increase. And there is practically no need whatsoever to use reverse thrust anything more than idle. Actually, when we land at any airport, any runway, we run a calculation before it was tables to its computers, where we enter the meteorological data of the runway that we're going to use. The database has the runway length and everything else, and we enter the weight of our aeroplane and everything else, and it calculates the landing distance with a 60% margin. And this calculation is based on no use of reverse. So practically, if you just put idle reverse, you are safe. The only time that I would be needing any more reverse than idle is if I go to airports with excessively short runways, like Bristol, for example, in England, where the runway is very short. And there, yes, a safety factor comes in, and maybe we'll tell the pilots that although you still have the margin, get to maximum reverse in the beginning, see how your aeroplane is doing, and then you can reduce to idle. But for 99% of the European airports, that's my opinion, there is no need for idle reverse, for reverse any more than idle.
We've got a question in the chat just to say, to explain what ADS-B stands for.
Okay.
Go on, George.
Okay, ADS-B is a transponder on the aeroplane that broadcasts, B stands for broadcast, certain data from the aeroplane's flight at certain time intervals. And this data is collected by either ATC or free receivers that they are around. ADS-C C stands for contract. The ADS-C system has the ability that your receiver can interrogate the airport and extract all the information it needs. While in B, the broadcasted data are fixed, in C, they are contracted. The interrogating station makes a contract of what data it needs, and the airplane responds with the exact data that the station needs. This is the difference between B and C.
Thanks, George. Martin, you come in, and then Jos.
One remark to the general aviation planes and your problem in Farnborough. We have an official document that we are entitled, and it's legal to publish the data of each plane, except general aviation, where it could happen that the owner of the plane is as well the pilot. As this is a privacy question that you mentioned as well, we have to respect this, and we could not use the ADS-B data from small general aviation flights and publish this, because the pilot himself, who might be the owner of the plane, could be hurt in his rights. That's the only reason where we are restricted. All the other things are legally, and we could publish everywhere because it's public data that everybody could receive.
Thanks, Martin. Yes, George, you come in, and then Jos, who's been waiting very patiently. Don't encourage us, Jos, otherwise we'll talk all day. George, you come in next.
I just wanted to augment to what was just said about that the data is public. I flew for the last 11 years for the royal family of Qatar. So I was flying some aeroplanes that had some, let's say, sensitivities in security. These aeroplanes, the transmissions were blocked, so they will not appear. Anything else that flies, it's public information. Nothing is secret.
Thanks, George. That's useful. Jos, on you go.
Mute. Sorry, I was also a bit late. I had to take care of my grandsons and I was 10-15 minutes late. So sorry, I couldn't also, but I will look back at the presentation of Martin. But I have, let me start with some good news. You know, we have been involved in a campaign with 15 action groups around Brussels airport. And we have got a very nice result because our Deputy Prime Minister, who is in charge also of aviation and transport, has put on the table of the government, of the federal government, a number of proposals to reduce the noise around Brussels airport. And I can tell you the most controversial one is our first thing, is to ban night flights. So our Deputy Prime Minister in charge of transport, okay, he's of the Green Party, has now tabled, and they will discuss it on Wednesday in the federal government, and it has, I would say, caused a lot of political protests from most of the political parties. It's always the job argument which is prevailing. You are killing the airport, the jobs will disappear, and so on. But in addition to banning the night flights, and his proposal is to ban them by October next year, he's also, and that's why I put the question, he's also making a proposal to make the QCs of the airport, of the planes, much more stringent. And this comes back to what George said in the beginning. The planes have become much more silent in the last 15-20 years, and they are not in tune anymore with the standards. Now you can make the standards more stringent, or you can say we don't want the noisy planes anymore because there are much better planes to come to our airport. And so his proposal is to make more stringent QC standards for Brussels airport. Now, my question is, that's a rather straightforward, I would say, legal instrument, you can say. We ban planes during certain periods of so many QCs and so on. Is there any evidence or any evidence of the link between QCs of planes and noise related measurements? Because they are politically much more difficult to put into legislation, because you know the noise in different areas and so on. So if you go to a higher level, that is the emissions of the noise at the planes. My question is there any evidence to track QCs between noise levels? And if so, what are the I would say the best standards there?
That's a very interesting question, Jos, and congratulations on the potential night flight ban. That is very good news and something you've been fighting for years. George, Martin, any thoughts on Jos's question about QCs and the measurements? It's an interesting question, but I certainly don't know the answer to it.
Can you just explain? I missed part of the question. What is a QC? What does it stand for?
Right. Jos, do you want to come back? Do you want to put yourself off mute?
Okay, well, QC is the quota counts. Counts. It's the official, I would say, noise emission standard, which is given to the plane. The type of the plane. So every plane has its certificate, and which states what quota count what kind of noise emission it has. And it's as simple as that. And it's a kind of certificate which is officially recognized also by ICAO. It's the link between official certification of planes on noise emissions and the reality on the ground of how people perceive the noise. But legislation is much more, I would say, straightforward or easy to impose on airlines when you tell them your plane is too noisy. You can't come in those periods, for example, or you're banned completely from the airport.
So the question, it's a good point. And so the question really just is that is the system that Martin's talking about able to pick up whether the planes are there's noise quota thing, and whether the planes are exceeding it? I think it's something we may not know the answer to. I don't. George, Martin, any thoughts? Yes, Martin.
The real noise is important and not the road that is on the document. For every type of a plane, you have different kinds of engines, and they have all data for this. But the real noise that happens, that we measure, that we suffer from, is for us the basis for any complaint or for any action. Because it could be that noise is differently perceived from buildings, echoes, other ways how noise is going to happen. Noise is acoustic trash coming from to us, down to us. So this trash is differently coming in. And it's not to quote by a document that says this plane is less loud than the others or something like this.
Josh, I think you raised your hand again.
Yes.
I agree with
let me even say why it is so important in the case of Belgium. So our federal minister for transport, Mr. Gilles Quinet, has put on the table this proposal to make more stringent QC norms for the airport in Brussels. He does that because he has the authority to do so. QCs of planes are within his remit. You know, he's empowered to do that. That's emissions of noise of planes. What happens on the ground and the way people perceive the noise, the emission, is a regional competence. So since the airport is in Flanders, it's the regional government of Flanders which is in charge of that. We are fighting now with the government of Flanders, which has to, I would say, give a new license to the airport by mid next year. So there is a public consultation on that. You know, there's a whole heavy procedure on that, also with environmental assessment and so on. So we are fighting on both fronts. The thing is that there is something called divida et impera, you know, which comes from the Romans already, that if one is doing something on QCs, the other can say, okay, we are going to fight that, and we will make sure that it doesn't impact too much on the business of the airport. And the other one will do the same, and they will give the stick to each other, so that very little is happening. That's why I am asking the question, the link between, on the one side, the QC, which is the authority and the responsibility of our federal ministry, and the, I would say, environmental license and the conditions which will be imposed on the airport, which is a regional responsibility and authority. But if you can link the two, then at least you can argue that both should do their job. Because otherwise, one will say, you do your job and our problem is solved. You know, if the QCs are stronger, you know, or stricter, then we don't need to look at him anymore at emissions the way people perceive. And that's why I think it's important to have the link between the two.
Yes, indeed it is. I don't know if there's any further comments on that. It's a well-made point, Joss. Right, I've just seen that Mike Gerard, who was due to be one of our speakers, has joined us. Mike, we have a few minutes left, so you could say a few words about Geneva, but before you do, Robert Buick is, I think, raised his hand. I can't see you, Robert, but I can see a red background. Yeah. So I think.
Okay, so thanks, John. I just wanted to come in on the QCs. The QCs are just a rating that the ICAO talks about and the industry does measurements of, but they're very restrictive. They only cover the initial takeoff and landing, and they in no way consider the way the aircraft are operated. So the way they climb and those kind of things. So the QC rating doesn't really give an indication of how noisy the aircraft's going to be, because if they fly over the rooftops, it's going to be very noisy. So it's not enough to be the QC rating. And I think, as somebody mentioned, the engines are quite different, and the engines there's quite a variation. If you take 380, some of those engines are much more noisy, and I'm sure it's the case with many of the different engines, the Rolls-Royce engines, the GE engines, and all those kind of things. So the QC rating doesn't really tell you that much about the level of noise you're likely to get overhead of you if they're not operating in a noise a noise-friendly way, and because that's the problem we have around Heathrow, and I'm sure as is everywhere. George described. No one is following anything that's they're supposed to be. So that's all I just wanted to say. Thank you very much, John. Cheers. Thanks, Robert. Arlene.
I'm unmuted. Do you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay.
Is it sunny New York today, Arlene? Or
yes, it is. It's sunny in New York and it's not raining. So
okay.
Here's my question. I listen to what's happening in Europe, and I know this is not happening with the federal administration, aviation administration in the United States. Here's my question. If you get these rules where planes landing cannot land at night in Europe, in Schiphol Airport, let's say, or in Belgium, and you put restrictions on sound, what's going to happen with the aircraft coming from the United States? I would assume they have to abide by the rules of the country in which they land.
Yes.
And that's going to be so different from what the rules are in the United States. They're going to have to abide by European standards. And you're definitely way ahead of the standards in the United States. And that to me is interesting. If you're going to abide by the standards in Europe, which are much more stringent with respect to curbing aircraft noise, will this carry over to the United States? Will the United States get into conflict with European cities that are restricting their aircraft from landing as they do in the United States? I'm just wondering what this will lead to. Will it have some disturbance in the way the countries of Europe will deal with the cities of the United States? Because we're not near you at all.
It's a much wider question that. Alexander, I don't know whether you want to say something. You put something in the chat there, which it looked interesting, but I didn't quite catch it all. But I think something about Turkey. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. Just to add a comment on what Arlene was saying, I think that this kind of regulations for night flights are important in Europe, but the aviation is a really complex system. So if it's not profitable for airlines to land in Europe, they will relocate the flights to Turkey, and then they will fly to Turkey, and then you will fly back from Turkey to Paris, to Berlin, to Barcelona, and etc. So in this systemic thing, we also need to think that the regulation should be set in most places we can in order to avoid this dislocation of the problem. Because then we will have noise levels increasing in Istanbul, and then bigger emissions because the route to go to Paris is longer because you have to go to Istanbul and then go back to Paris.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense,
Yeah,
doesn't it? Isn't it, Arlene? Yeah. George, I think you wanted to come in there. I think I saw your hand.
I wanted to tell to Arlene that mainly the air traffic between United States and Europe will not be affected by a night flight ban in Europe. If you check to see what the timing of these flights are,
okay.
the flights will leave United States afternoon or late afternoon, fly overnight, gaining the time difference. In other words, the sun will come out too early for the Americans that are leaving home. And they will land in Europe after daybreak. And then there is the opposite wave. They will all leave Europe anywhere between 12 noon and like 5 or 6 in the afternoon. And they will be on their way over the Atlantic for the United States to land there just before, during dusk or just before night. So most of the passenger traffic between the US and Europe will not be affected by something like this. What could be affected is the cargo traffic.
Yes.
Okay. Because a lot of the cargo airports, for example, Cologne-Bonn is one of the major hubs of the cargo airlines, and this one operates all night long. And I don't see that they're ever going to ban Cologne-Bonn from operating all night long because our stores in Europe will be running out of goods very quickly. Okay, so
thanks, George. Thanks,
That's
George.
a good point.
Yeah, Martin, your hand's up.
We have 12 years of night flight ban experience in Frankfurt. It works. An international big hub, a big airport. It works. Nobody believed it up front. Lufthansa did not go away with cargo. Everything continues to go. It's just a different operation of those 50, 60 flights per night that you operate to a different time. You have to change your system. Flying is an international, real international business. Every airport on this globe has its data when you can operate or not operate this airport and when you can fly and when you have to leave. This is in the database of all airlines well established as a system. So if you have a night flight restriction or ban, then they say, okay, we could not start or we could not go down at this and this time frame, and then we have to operate in a different way. But it works. We have 6 hours night flight ban in Frankfurt now for 12 years, and everything went on, and the world is not in chaos, and everything went on, and the airport is still existing and increased in many ways, and we have still our cargo, and we have still emergency flights and other things where we have special regulations. So this works well, and we have 6 hours no flights at night. And it's such a great success for all the people in this Rhine-Main Valley area that have no noise at night. The people appreciate this. Even those people are not critical with the airport, they will appreciate this. And anybody who wants to change this again, he has a big problem because it's set, it's existing. And we live on this, and we have a quiet night from 11 in the evening to 5 in the morning. And we want to exceed this to 6 because the morning hour is the most difficult. We want to have 1 hour at least more in the morning and the evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Right, it's coming up to 6 o'clock. We ended up with night flights. We started with noise measurements, but don't worry. I think it does just show how much concern there is about night flights and how interesting the Belgian decision will be, Jos, because it could influence other airports as well. What I'm going to say before I hand back to Dominique, Mike Gerard, who was due to speak to us from Geneva, just joined us about 6 or 7 minutes before the end of the session. So I'm going to suggest that Mike's paper is circulated to everybody who's been on the call, because he was going to talk about how the system Martin talked about, EANS, helped them in Geneva, just as the way as George very clearly outlined the assistance it was giving people in Athens. So I think what we need to say probably, Martin, is that your system, EANS, E-A-N-S, if people want more details, either to email yourself or to go on the website. And certainly, Martin and his colleagues have been instrumental in setting up EANS systems in many, many places around Europe and beyond. So that's probably the way to take that forward. The chat, Carla, will be sent around. It'll be available. While we all go in and enjoy ourselves, Dominique has now the task of saving the chat and doing all those administrative things that we escape from. So that will happen, Carla. Just before I hand back to Dominique, just to thank Martin and George so much. That was really, really informative stuff. I'm sure it's something a subject we'll keep coming back to. But it's just gone 6, Dominique, so I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. I enjoyed very much this webinar, very informative, and the views of Martin and George were very informing. Yes, and there's a lot that wasn't said, not enough time probably, but you all have Martin's email address, or if you don't, I will put it also in the on the page where you will find the video and the chat on our website, because there were many questions about how you could purchase or how you could link to an EANS and the cost of all this, and so technical, more practical information. So that was very important. This webinar, there are communities, residents working for other residents, providing information, providing help, and this is very important.